ולכן, מתוך אחריות לאומית,
Out of a sense of national responsibility, out of a will to prevent a rupture among our people, I have decided to pause the second and third readings of the bill in this session of the Knesset in order to give time and reach that wide consensus.
It's a moment of truth for Israel and its democracy. First the opposition, then army reservists, and now this general strike. And yet, the country's longest-serving leader still sees a path to win. He's promising that suspension. He's promising a real negotiation. How will the opposition respond? How will Netanyahu, himself on trial for corruption, handle his own far-right coalition and those who want to overhaul the judiciary sooner rather than later? A sizable number of Israelis still voted for him despite all of his baggage. Why? What support? Both domestically and abroad. And there's that bigger issue that goes beyond Israel. Democracies are only as strong as the faith citizens put in their institutions. Populists often argue that to follow the leader and distrust the system. Why is that such a familiar pattern in today's world? Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at what could be a defining moment for Israel. And joining us from Modi'in, halfway between Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, former member of parliament Ksenia Svetlova, executive director of the advocacy group, I guess you say ropes.org, Regional Organization for Peace, Economic and Security.
Hello, good to hear you.
Thank you for joining us. I want to thank as well Gil Mehaley, editor-in-chief of Causeur magazine. How are you?
Thank you. Great being here.
And from Jerusalem, our correspondent Iris Mockler is with us. The France 24 debate on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. Iris, this is the announcement that Israel had been waiting for ever since the sacking of Benjamin Netanyahu's defense minister on Sunday and those spontaneous protests that erupted.
Yes, 24 hours ago, the defense minister was sacked, and for all of the past 10 hours, maybe even longer, we've been waiting for Netanyahu to speak, being told every hour he will speak. It's interesting that he needed so much time to say a very simple thing, and perhaps he'll pay a price for taking so long to say it. But what he did say is this. He is willing to suspend the legislation. At least, you know, the Parliament ends this week, this winter session ends this week. He will bring it back during the summer session, so in a few months' time, let's say July, and in that time, he expects there to be negotiation. And I think that's what we are seeing, something he could have easily said a week ago, and something I think that was anticipated too. No mention, interestingly, of the defense minister whom he sacked. There's a lot of pressure on him to reinstate him, since this policy that he's enacting now is exactly what the defense minister, what Yoav Gallant was demanding.
He also talked about insubordination.
Yes, it's very important to him. Part of the power of this demonstration has been the reserve officers who have said they will not turn up to training. They do not have to turn up. You know, reserves are voluntary, but the Israeli military depends to a very large degree on its reserve officers. And what they said was that, interestingly, they said their slogan became, you know, a people's army is only possible in a democracy. And if you're going to take away our democracy, we're not going to train. They said they would turn up if it was an order. But while it's not an order and while it's voluntary, if you're threatening the democracy, we won't come, was what they said. And that was very incendiary. Lots of Israelis don't like that. The idea of refusal to serve is not popular here. But for Netanyahu, because it made the opposition to him so powerful, for Netanyahu, it was unbearable.
We're looking at live images from Tel Aviv, where anti-reform protesters have gathered. Let me turn to you, Ksenia Svetlova, and just ask you.
This is Jerusalem.
This is Jerusalem?
Yes.
Oh, says, thanks for the correction, Gil Mehaley. Ksenia Svetlova, how do you think the opposition is going to react to this pause button that's been hit by the prime minister?
Yes, so now it's really getting interesting because until now, opposition had quite an easy time. Netanyahu was adamant to continue with the legislation. There was no attempt to divide the opposition because it was quite clear that there is no intent to stepping back. Right now, when Netanyahu says, well, I'm giving some time for negotiations, to negotiations with whom? I have to tell you that what we saw during this month already of protests, it's the unbelievable strength of civil society that does not necessarily take order from the opposition. So first of all, in the opposition, we have one party at least that is more inclined for negotiations, and this is the blue and white, the ex-blue and white. Now they're called the, don't even know how to translate their new name, the party that is led now by Benny Gantz. They are more inclined to negotiations and dialogue. There are other parties that are less inclined to that, and there is this huge amount of demonstrators, of protesters, thousands and thousands of people who are not just taking orders from the Yair Lapid, Benny Gantz, or anybody else. Important remark, what we see right now is a demonstration of supporters of the so-called reform of Benjamin Netanyahu in Jerusalem.
Yes.
And many of the protesters are holding signs, the leftists are traitors. So this is what we can see right now.
All right, thanks for that correction. Yeah, there's protesters on both sides, and we heard the prime minister hailing those coming out in support of his cause. Ksenia Svetlova, what do you make of the silence that it took all day for Netanyahu to break?
Well, first of all, as far as we can tell, he negotiated for hours with the Minister for Internal Security, Itamar Ben-Gvir, because it seemed that out of all of his coalition, not the ultra-Orthodox parties, not even the Likud himself, was the problematic element. It was the religious Zionist, the ultra-right-wing, some would even say fascist party of Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir that needed some concessions. What are the concessions that they got eventually? So Itamar Ben-Gvir, of course, needs to put a show. He needs to prove to his supporters that he got something out of it for just, taking his back his demand to go all the way. And what did he get back? This is really a question because he shows a document that was allegedly signed by Netanyahu that basically approves a private militia that will be created under the guard of Itamar Ben-Gvir and will answer directly to him. And we see already now in some of the commentators from the right wing, basically a call, let's get back to this reform, to this legislation in a few months when we will be more ready. Who will be more ready? The new militia of Itamar Ben-Gvir will be more ready? This is the meaning, basically, yes, of this whole negotiation. So I think that it took time for Netanyahu to convince his very unruly partner for the coalition and to give him something to pacify him, at least for a meanwhile, until July, when things will heat up again.
Let me turn to you, Gil Mihaly, then. Is that what the deal is, you think?
Well, I think, first of all, we heard a first-class analysis. The opposition in Israel is divided, and it's only the incredible series of mistakes made by Netanyahu that created this movement. So he did the obvious thing, is to gain some time and to try to divide the opposition. So first of all, he mentioned in his speech the weak link, which is Benny Gantz, which is only waiting to go into the government. So Benny Gantz now will be the useful fool of this comedy.
You think Benny Gantz, the former PM, is gonna enter the government?
He will let Netanyahu use him.
Why?
Because this is a question for a psychiatrist. It's not a political question. I don't understand why he's so eager to be in charge of things. He's a very bad politician, and he's been had already a few times by Netanyahu. So Netanyahu is going to use him again. Actually, I mean, he's like a scout. He's so afraid that Israel will go down the drain that he will save it. Even though he sees that Netanyahu is putting Israel in danger in order to make him save it at the last moment, and he still plays the game. So this is what Netanyahu is going to do. And he will use guns in order to not to pay what he promised Ben Gvir, because he'll tell Ben Gvir, hey, I have an alternative majority. So calm down. You keep my signature with the other signatures. You try to sell it in Sotheby's, because the only value of a Netanyahu signature is in Sotheby's or Christie's, not in the real life. I mean, there's a list of people in Israel with promises from Netanyahu that they can hang you nowhere.
Right.
So if Netanyahu was a Scandinavian Viking hero, his name would have been Liarson.
Right. When it comes to his own coalition, how does he keep that together? Because we talked about Itamar Ben Gvir, but there's also a television interview that was given just a couple of hours ago by the powerful chair of the Knesset's Constitution, Law and Justice Committee. He's from the Religious Zionist Party, Simcha Rothman, and he wants the reform to happen now.
Netanyahu will kick the can. He will, he was supposed to give his announcement in 10 this morning. So he already gained at least 10 hours. Maybe there will be a war. Maybe he called, contrary to what he said, that this is spontaneous support demonstrations for him.
Unprompted.
He called them the whole day through Twitter to come and demonstrate. I think he hoped to see as many demonstrators on the other side in order to say no. I mean, those who are in the streets don't really represent the majority. Maybe there will be someone who will die, and maybe there will be bloodshed, and then you can say, hey, let's wait the 7 days, the families, we have to respect, and he will win a week, and he will win 2 weeks, and this is how he stayed in power 12 years, hour by hour, day by day. Netanyahu has 2 time frames, an hour from now, and the eternity of Israel. Between tomorrow morning and 2,000 years, he doesn't have a clue.
Iris Makler, when he talks about suspending his reform, do we know what that means? After all, there's that key element, which is the one that reduces the number of reasons for which he himself can be kicked out of office. That's already been approved. So is that also on ice?
No, that's been passed. That's not on ice. But the other ones, and that's just interesting in itself too. Self-interest always governs the decisions and how they're made, I think, in Netanyahu's government.
So hold on, Iris. So let's just be clear on this. So what you're saying is that the part of this reform that protects himself is passed, and now the rest is up in the air.
Yes, because that was actually passed. There was a 3rd reading speech. It's an ordinary parliamentary process. That's been passed with 3 readings. And that's why he gave his speech on Thursday night and said, I'm taking over now, because he felt that he couldn't be kicked out of office. And the rest of it, or the first tranche of it, let's say, was meant to be passed now, this week, in the last sitting week of this winter session of Parliament. But because of this uproar, it's an interesting thing. I just have to pause to say, had he not fired the defence minister, they could have been passing this tomorrow. But because he fired the defence minister, because of that own goal, if you like, it's not being passed tomorrow, and it's being passed, as Gil says, further down the line till the summer session of Parliament, till July they're talking about. I have to say one thing to Gil, though, that I think is interesting. I don't know the numbers, I just saw this quickly on the news before I started talking to you, but maybe Benny Gantz is not as foolish a politician as you might think. The latest polls show that the Likud is taking a nosedive, and the person who's benefiting is actually Benny Gantz and his party.
Right, but could there then be a coalition deal without going to early elections?
It's always possible to especially if you're Benjamin Netanyahu, because he has done it before, to reorganize your coalition government. Somebody might resign and you'll bring someone else in. His problem is that the opposition parties have said they will not sit with someone who's charged with crimes, including corruption, is facing a corruption trial, not even charges. And so that's why he had very slim pickings, and they were all right-wing. This is the most right-wing government Israel's ever had and he's ever led. And I don't know that it would have been his natural choice. He doesn't like to be on the left of his governments. But if somebody would agree to sit with him, he could do a realignment. He could get rid of Ben Gvir if he wanted. If Benny Gantz would agree to break that commitment to his own public and come in and say, as Gil said, I'm saving Israel, I'm going to sit in this government for the sake of the national good, then he could get rid of Ben Gvir and maybe even Smotrich.
There's another landmine across the road, because he's in breach of his conflict of interest accord. The Supreme Court allowed him to present himself during the elections
in November 2022,
only if he engaged not to deal with subjects that had to do with the justice system. So even though he changed the impeachment law, so it's very difficult to revoke him, we can still hear next week the Supreme Court saying that he's an outlaw, that he's in breach of the contract, and so he didn't keep his word, his engagement to the Supreme Court. And since from now until July, the main thing on the agenda is exactly the subject that he shouldn't touch, it's clear that the situation is completely insane.
Ksenia Svetlova, are you expecting the Supreme Court to weigh in?
Well, it's very difficult to predict, especially the future, as they say. So I really don't know what will be the decision of the Supreme Court. But I can definitely tell you that the expectation that there will be, with Netanyahu's involvement or without Netanyahu involvement, any real conversation and a real dialogue, because that could be facilitated by President Yitzhak Herzog a while ago. Basically, since the very beginning, there was no appetite in this coalition for any dialogue, not with the opposition, not with the civil society, not at all. So between now and July, there will be, if there will be no weighing of the Supreme Court, there will be a lot of bickering. There will be a lot of attempt of the coalition to pretend as they are heading to some dialogue, while basically they are not. And as Gil said, and also your correspondent in Jerusalem said, this is very right. Netanyahu, if he could pull the trick and bring Benny Gantz to his coalition, he would do it in a second. He wanted to do it from the beginning. It will be not as easy as it feels. And basically, to my feeling is that the coalition passed today the budget in the first reading. We still have, of course, second and third between the end of May. But their goal today is to pass the budget. This is being now the immediate goal. Everything else is secondary to that. So the goal for the ultra-Orthodox, the goal for Ben Gvir, the goal for the Likud is to pass the budget and then to start use this budget for their benefit. How much time they will be able to survive in this situation without killing themselves, and with also this promise that they will go back to the legislation in July. Well, we don't really, we don't know this.
Well, maybe one of the keys in this, Ksenia Svetlova, is and Iris Makler was mentioning it earlier, the defense minister who resigned. He's from Netanyahu's own party, the Likud. Could there be surprises in parliament? Could there be a break inside of Likud? Or does Netanyahu have a strong hold on his own party?
Well, first of all, if Netanyahu had a strong hold over his party, we would perhaps expect today voting, today or on Wednesday, we would see already voting on this legislation, because the intention was definitely to get it done no matter what, and then to clean the mess This is what the coalition intended to do. They found out the hard way that with Gallant, with other, perhaps they are not exactly the rebels, not your classical rebels that would really speak out and will say that perhaps we are, like forming some other movement inside the Likud and so on. No, it's still premature to talk about that. But apparently there were quite a few Likud members that were not ready to vote for this legislation. This is for Likud party with their level of subordination. It's already a big progress. It's a lot.
We have, in the last minutes, the announcement by the main labor union, Ksenia Vetlova, that it's calling off its nationwide general strike. Your reaction to that, and also you mentioned the president. It's normally a mostly ceremonial role in Israel. Isaac Herzog had proposed dialogue before. Do we know what the specifics of that were?
First of all, about the end of strike. So this was expected. I think that the head of the labor unions wanted to show also of his might, his strength, and also to hint Netanyahu that he should not mess with any legislation that is deemed to diminish the right of strike. And this was on the table as well during the last few weeks. So this was a very powerful hint, and I think it was taken very seriously by the PM. Now about the president. Well, unfortunately, it seems that all parties in Israel are rejecting the president's efforts to hold any negotiations. Basically, both parties told him, you are not wanted in this game. This is not your game. He was condemned by both the coalition and the opposition for doing what he has to do. And at the same time, we all realize that if there would be a true will on the behalf of the coalition mainly to negotiate, they could use his good services a while ago and prevent and save Israel from all of this mess.
All right, so a lot of institutions weighing in. The unions, we've mentioned him. The president, we've talked about him. And, of course, one of the keys throughout this whole showdown has been those army reservists who've been speaking out. That's unprecedented. A few of them spoke with our correspondent Gwendoline de Bono.
Last week in the training, there was half of the quantity of the people. Half of them didn't come, and I assume that when the law will pass, most of them will not come. They will replace the pilots. They will replace me as a sniper, and that's it.
The set of laws that are passed are really taking away the essence of this country, which is Jewish and democratic, and that by itself is a little bit difficult, right? That's saying Jewish and democratic, but we found in these 75 years, we found a balance. It's deteriorating, and every week it's getting worse and worse. And I'm really afraid of what's going to happen here. We're on the verge of a civil war.
Verge of a civil war. Is that hyperbole, Gil Mahili? Is that over-exaggeration?
No. Not at all.
Really?
Yes. And let me go back to the reservists. First of all, it's not a choice. If you are called to do your reserve duty, you're not a volunteer. You have to go. But, for example, the pilots that are supposed to be part of the Israeli option in Iran, in order to have capacity, to fly at night, to do certain missions, etc., they fly once a week. When you fly once a week, the paperwork will never catch up with you. So they have to agree that they will do the reserve duty not according to protocol, okay? And they go once a week and they spend a day flying with their squadron and practicing, and there are not enough active service pilots in order to do the Iran sufficient number of sorties in order to push the Iran operation. The same thing for the Airborne Commando Division. In order to keep it in a position to act tomorrow, if need be, you need experienced reservists that come on call. You call them, they will come tomorrow. They will not wait for the paper. If you start messing with them, they will say, okay, send me the letter. I will respond in 14 days. I will be abiding the law, and you will not have a military option in Iran. It's as simple as that.
So why haven't the reservists managed to get the prime minister to reverse course? If
they did, why do you think the Yoav Gallant, the Minister of Defense, which was for he doesn't care. He was for this reform. Why do you think he panicked 48 hours ago? But he saw the army collapsing. He saw the Iranian option collapsing. If pilots don't fly several hours every week, they have to remake their capacities to fly at night. They have to make their recapacities to launch a certain kind of, and you need to fly more. I mean, it's a mess. You need to keep them in shape. You need to form, all the squadrons need to be capable of producing sorties as long as necessary tomorrow morning. This is probably not the case today. This is why everyone was talking about a crisis. And they thought that the Iranians are going to check how well prepared Israel is. So, if Gallant moved the finger, it is because he knows that.
Right.
So let's say that 300 pilots probably won us 5 or 6 months of respite.
Ksenia Svetlova, the opposition leader Yair Lapid, speaking in the last minutes, saying, quote, if the government can come up with a fair proposal, we can come out of this crisis stronger. What do you make of that conciliatory word?
Yes, it seems that both Yair Lapid and also Benny Gantz, who also published an announcement, and he said that he's basically waiting for Netanyahu's team at the president's residence. I would like to see how it will turn around, given that Netanyahu, by law, by the decision of the Supreme Court, cannot be involved, cannot be engaged. So it means that the very same people who more on the extreme side, who led this legislation that so far Minister of Justice Yariv Levin and also the head of the Judicial Committee, Simcha Rotman, they will be in charge basically of this negotiation and of this process. It's very unlikely. But I think that the opposition wants to show its goodwill. It's being examined right now by the civil society, by its own supporters. So they're not saying, okay, we believe Netanyahu and we are ready to basically cut the protests and that's it. They're saying a simple thing, that we want to see a fair proposal for some kind of compromise, and then we'll decide. I think that that's how you should read this decision. Of course, I also see many announcements of the various leaders of the protest movements and civil society movements who say we do not believe one word of Netanyahu, what he had to say. And if we are talking about lying, then it's the finance minister, Bezalel Smotrich, who said in Hebrew that Netanyahu is Shakran ben Shakran, a liar and the son of liar. So the level of credibility of the prime minister right now is extremely low, and everybody is going to show that, okay, they are ready to be partners, but only if something decent and honest will come out, which is, well, the chances are not very high for that.
Yeah, and okay, Iris Makler, let's just remind our viewers here. Benjamin Netanyahu, first elected as prime minister in 1996. He's a known entity. He is on trial for corruption. And we've seen a lot of salacious details, cigars bought in secret, Cuban cigars, a $27,000 a year habit that Netanyahu sometimes dipped in Cointreau. Despite all the testimony that came out last year in court, he still managed to get himself back, returned to office. Can you explain that to us?
I think he's a very good political player. That's what you can say about him. He was the one who pushed Ben Gvir into parliament so that those right-wing votes wouldn't be lost. And he was the one who cobbled together this deal, whereas the opposition parties didn't play as good a game. I think that's why he won this last election. People were sick of this impasse, this this 5 elections, one after another, and so they went with him one more time. But if the latest polls are anything to go by, I think they regret that. And I have actually heard Israeli journalists for the first time questioning whether Netanyahu is actually fit to hold office, something I haven't heard before. Very respectable political journalists having that discussion this morning. I just heard
having that discussion in private or openly on television and radio?
On radio. I heard them on radio having that discussion and saying maybe that they should have had it earlier. Is this man fit for office any longer? And I heard a former head of the Mossad who's come out against this whole judicial reform. But I heard him saying tonight that Netanyahu is no longer fit to do his job and should resign. So I think that especially these last few days, these last 48 hours, have actually changed. It's a tipping point, and it's a tipping point for Netanyahu as well. Even though, he did look tired, but he spoke forcefully. It was the Netanyahu that standing there tonight. But his absence during this whole event, I heard, this did make me laugh, I heard that some Likud members were saying that Netanyahu had been kidnapped and this was a body double because he wasn't acting like the Netanyahu they knew. So at the time that made me laugh. But when I heard these journalists this morning discussing whether he was fit for office, I did remember that. And I have thought during these past 3 months, this is not the Netanyahu we know.
It's not the Netanyahu perhaps we knew, but I'll put it to you, Gil Mehaly. He still is at the center of the game, and we're hearing these conciliatory noises again from the leader of the opposition.
Well, the leaders of the opposition have a very delicate game because the consensus among those who are demonstrating against the reform is that it's not about changing the outcome of the election. It's about stopping the judicial revolution. So if they are not careful, they're going to break the movement, and all those say, okay, so all this was just for you to take Netanyahu's place. I'm here for something else. So they have to play, because now the game is who will break, whether or not the opposition will be able to mobilize in June and July when it's hot, when people are going to Greece, because Netanyahu will wait for them with the same package. And he will see if they can do it again. If they will find again the 300 pilots, if people will do it again when it's 38 in 2 a.m. in the morning, when it's difficult and when you just go, you just want to go somewhere. This is what the challenge is now. This is the game. Whether or not they will be, he will be able to divide them. If they will be tired, because there's also probably also economic problems, and it's not him who's going to pay. Certain people who are brave today and say we don't care how much it will cost, they will get the bill in 2 or 3 months, and I'm not sure that they will be all there again in July. Okay, and when the businesses are not doing okay, when you see, so it was a brilliant move by Netanyahu. He's going to win time. He's going to see whether or not he will find a rival at the same force in July.
Benjamin Netanyahu, again, always at the center of it all. Let me ask you, Ksenia Svetlova, when in the U.S., critics of Donald Trump say we focus too much on one person and not enough on those that are behind him. And there's been this accusation going around that it's, the same people sometimes that are behind both. There's this think tank called the Coalition Policy Forum, funded in large part by American Jewish billionaires. A lot of articles have been coming up about that. Is that overplayed?
Well, I can tell you that there was definitely a very strong sentiment in Israel when Donald Trump was elected and became the president of the U.S. I think that Israel was the country where Trump was actually more popular than in the U.S. And if the elections would take place here, then he would get definitely more votes than he get in the U.S. elections. But first of all, Trump is not there anymore. Those who financed Trump, those who supported him, Kohelet type of persons, well, their game might be not necessarily what the average Likud leader who adores Netanyahu because he's such a strong international leader, because he has great English, which many of the Israeli leaders do not possess the skill, because he's well respected, or at least he was respected all over the world, and he has this certain image. When we dissect actually the reforms that were proposed by Kohelet, we see a big difference between the secular kind of, more traditionalist, but still quite secular life of an average Likud voter and what these guys have to offer. Their offer is something that is very, very different. It's more religious oriented. It's supported much more, as we saw today during this horrific crisis. Who was the party who insisted with all its might on passing and going and continuing with the reform? It was the religious Zionists. It was not the David Bitan or Dudi Amsalem or other members of the Likud who are more associated with the more traditionalist, but still, people who like to go and play football on Saturday or go to see a movie on Friday night. So I think that actually we see a different element here that are more associated with people like Simcha Rotman, Yariv Levin, the Minister of Justice, the religious Zionism, the settlers, those who have a very different idea of how Israel should look like, annexation perhaps also in tune with this reform, and the reason why they support this bunch of legislation so much is not only to get Netanyahu out of jail. They don't really care for him. Their eyes are on annexation of the West Bank, and this is, I think that it's quite clear that this is not a necessary goal of majority of those who would like to see Netanyahu as a leader. That's why people are so much confused today. That's why it's not a classical right versus left Israeli kind of collision. This is truly about the vision of how the state of Israel will look like in the next generation, in 5 years and 10 years, how its army will look like, what kind of equality will be there, what will be the place of women. And it's not a mistake, why we saw so many women clad in the red clothes of from the famous Netflix movie, The Story of a Servant. This is because women are very much afraid that eventually this reform will cost them their freedom. And this is, again, very far from the liberal ideas of the Likud party that, yes, partly still exists there in the DNA, or the very DNA of this party, but they are non-existent totally in the more messianic type, very religious, Simcha Rotman, Yariv Levin, and Bezalel Smotrich and Ben Gvir parties.
We're out of time, but once again, if you're just joining us here on France 24, the big takeaway, Iris Makler, is that the Prime Minister of Israel has bought himself more time.
I think he had no other option. Gil said it was a brilliant move. I think it was his only move.
Iris, I want to thank you so much for joining us from Jerusalem. I want to thank Ksenia Svetlova for being with us from Modi'in. Gil Mihaly, thank you for joining us. Thanks for being with us. More coverage on our website, france24.com.